Hi everyone, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and I've got a little quiz for you. The quiz is to look at this position and tell me what opening it came from. So you can have a few moments to kind of sort things out and figure out which opening gives rise to this position. And then once you've kind of figured it out, let's resume and have a look and see. Okay, so the answer is, well, it comes from a Caro-Kann. So E4, C6, D4, D5, takes, C4, so the Panoff-Botvinnik variation. And, okay, bishop to B4, bishop D3, takes, castles, B6, rook E1, bishop B7, bishop D3, knight C6, A3, and bishop to E7. So there you go. It comes from this variation of the Caro-Kann. What's that you say? You had a different way to get there in the Caro-Kann? Okay, let's take a look. So instead of bishop to B4, another way there is bishop to E7 straight away. Then white takes, plays bishop to C4, and eventually black retreats the knight to avoid the capture on D5. So A3 now, B6, bishop to D3, bishop to B7. And we found a second way there. What's that? Oh, the Nimzo-Indian. Okay, yeah, we can get there from the Nimzo-Indian as well. So D4, knight F6, C4, E6, knight C3, bishop to B4, E3, okay, and we can see all very normal Nimzo-Indian moves. And lo and behold, we got there again. Alright, so there are two ways to get there. Oh, hold on. I sense a third way coming on here. We can get there from the C3 Sicilian as well, or from a regular knight F3 move order, but really transposing into a C3 Sicilian. So we can get there, let's say, make these first 5 moves, or do it like this, more commonly. And now from here, bishop to E2, and we castle. Black eventually trades. So this is typical. Once white castles, there's kind of a threat of playing C4 and pushing forward a bit. So black generally makes this capture at this point. And here we have it yet again. So we've got it now from 3 different openings. And to be honest, you might have guessed any of these 3. This would be pretty standard. The really surprising thing is that there's a 4th opening from which we can get this. And I'm not referring to the semitarish. We can probably get there through a semitarish as well. But this way of getting there might surprise you. And this is really the reason why I'm showing you this this variation and the game that we're going to take a look at. So we can get there, believe it or not, by the French defense. So this was news to me. So D4, D5, knight to D2, and now, for instance, knight F6, bishop D3, C5, C3, knight to C6, and now white just allows black to give him an isolated pawn. Both sides castle, B6 once again, and now A3, and lo and behold, there we are. And by the way, what white does in this position is to play bishop C2, bring the queen to D3, and there will be some threats against this point. So there are ideas like bishop to G5, or even D5 followed by bishop to G5. Just to show you a well-known little cheap trap here, but one that many people have fallen for, frankly, so it's worth knowing about, is rook to C8, let's say queen to D3, and now, alright, the blunder has taken place many different ways. Let's say rook to C7, I think. Actually, I'm not sure if rook to C7 will fall for it. I think it will. Yeah, rook to C7. And so now, the idea, if it works here, is D5, E takes D5, and now bishop to G5. Threatening to take on F6 and then give mate. And on G6, you play rook takes E7. And if black recaptures with, let's say, the knight, then bishop takes F6, is probably winning for white, or very close to winning. While on queen takes E7, yeah, actually this I'm pretty sure is winning. So on queen takes E7, knight takes D5 is crushing unless black gives up the queen here. But even so, white stands better in this position as well. It's a rook and a knight for the queen. which obviously favors white. So that's a little trick that illustrates some of what white is up to. Another move here that can be played is bishop to a6. I think this was played in Kaidanov Anand, which was roughly equal, but then Anand missed a neat little trick, and Kaidanov beat him. An old game, but still. Alright, so after queen and d3, black really ought to play g6 here to cut that out. So rook c7 is a mistake. And after g6, then white plays bishop h6, rook e8, and then after rook a to d1, brings this bishop back to b3. Alright, this is all well-known theory. White's maybe a little bit better here. But anyway, that's how this goes. Now we're going to look at a very similar line, and one that again illustrates this isolated pawn idea. So there's a new book that just came out by, I think, a Russian grandmaster named Denis Yevseyev, and he recommends this isolated pawn approach to the French. And it's a very interesting idea, really. I mean, it certainly avoids the typical slog that lots of white players hate when they face the French. So you don't get this locked up pawn structure, and frankly, you avoid pretty much everything that black is used to seeing in the French with this approach. Now, sometimes you do have to end up pushing e4, e5, but in many cases, black makes the exchanges, you get the isolated pawn, and then it's just a very classical isolated queen pawn type of middle game that arises, and not at all what the typical French player is used to. Alright, so I just looked at a line with knight f6, but we can get there, we're to very similar positions against the other third moves as well. So for instance, c5, c3, and now, alright, one line is knight c6, knight g to f3, takes, bishop b4 check. Again, the knight drops back to c3. And this one's kind of funny, although it can get there via f6 as well. And knight to d5. Now, here, both bishop to d2 and queen c2 are straight out of the Panov-Botvinnik attack in the Caro-Kann. Although castles is actually quite interesting too. And here white can do it. Can't do it, I think, in the normal move order of the Caro-Kann. But this is a very interesting pawn sack. Alright, another possible line is c takes d4 straight away. Again, this check. Alright, now knight to d5 would transpose into what we just looked at. Oh no, I'm sorry, it would not transpose. Knight c6, knight f3, knight to d5 would. Alright, so here we have another very similar line. Again, this is a position that can arise via the Nimzo-Indian. It's basically a Karpov variation. And, you know, white has chances for an edge here, but the key thing is that we're taking black out of his comfort zone. So if you like playing with an isolated queen pawn, then this may be the variation for you. Alright, instead of 3c5, there's also a6, and again we get similar possibilities. Okay, if black takes twice, yeah, here we don't go back to c3, but we can just go straight ahead. Sorry, actually we do go back to c3 here too. There is, I think, a line where the knight doesn't go there that we'll get to, but generally speaking, the knight does go back to c3. Okay, another possibility from here is knight to c6 straight away. Bishop d3, takes, and okay, if bishop to e7, this is a possible line, and on bishop to b4 check, okay, we go back, and again, very familiar kind of position by now. Alright, so finally we're going to look at another move that black can try on move 3. There's also h6, but I'm skipping that for now. But, I mean, it's a pretty rare line. So, but bishop to e7 is a very important line, and the game we're going to take a look at is Plaskett against Nigel Short, played in the British Championship in 2000. Actually, no, I'm sorry, British Team Championship, not the British Championship, the British Team Championship. Short, of course, most of you have heard of, I would think. He's a former World Championship finalist. He lost to Kasparov, and in fact, he recently played a blitz match with Kasparov that he only lost by a narrow margin. He's probably the second greatest British player of all time behind Michael Adams, and they've both had tremendous successes in the chess world. So I think Adams' successes are a little bit higher than Short's, but both of them are great players who have been world class and at least near the top for going on a couple of decades now. Jim Plaskett is less well known. He's a British GM as well, but like in the low 2,500 range. Typically, I don't think he's ever hit 2,600 or even been too close to it. But one thing that Plaskett does extremely well is play attacking chess. So this guy has won some very nice, very attractive attacking gems over the years, and we're going to see one here. I mean, he's a dangerous player. His record overall against top guys is not very good, but he has beaten some of them, and here we'll see. I mean, he really puts it to short in this game. All right, so knight g to f3, knight f6, bishop d3, c5, c3, and so Plaskett is one of the real pioneers of this system. He's won quite a number of games with this isolated queen pawn variation against the French. So knight c6, castles. Okay, and now here, for instance, if black castles, white does play e5. Believe it or not. So at some point, the threat to go into the isolated queen pawn variation is significant. The other thing is that white runs out of useful moves before black. So I mean, black can maybe play queen to b6 next, or take and play queen to b6. I mean, at some moment, white has to do something. And so here, white should play e5. But in our game, short play de, and then we got our isolated queen pawn position after all. All right, now here, Yevseyev recommends, or he mentions two moves, and he analyzes both. There's knight to c3 as Plaskett played, but he prefers bishop to e3, I think, or at least he makes it his main line. So knight to b4, bishop to b1, b6. And here, rather than knight to c3, which he thinks is not as effective, here he suggests a scheme with knight to g3, and white's going to follow up with a3, queen d3, let's say knight to e5, especially if the knight goes from b4 to d5, rook e1, bishop to a2, and rook a to d1. A very typical kind of formation for white in an isolated queen pawn position. And this knight on g3 may jump to h5 at some moment. Kind of have to wait and see what happens. But the other pieces, it's fairly clear where they're headed. All right, so there's a game he mentions that continues like this. Bishop to b7, a3, knight b to d5, queen d3. And now, all right, if rook to c8, then bishop g5. Not threatening bishop takes f6 yet, but the possibility starts to lurk. And also knight h5 might be a threat in the making. So g6, black will most of the time be forced to do this sooner or later. Bishop h6, rook e8. And standard operating procedure now for white. When the b1 g7 diagonal gets closed by black playing g7 to g6, sooner or later white will play bishop to a2, transferring it to a diagonal that's still more useful, and of course also clearing the way for the rook from a1 to come into play, often into the d1 square. So bishop to a2, queen d6, knight e5, knight d7, rook e1, supporting the knight again. And okay, white has good play. Whether he has an advantage or not, who knows. But it's certainly a very playable position. The knight can come to e4. In some cases, there might be knight takes f7 tricks. White might also consider doubling on the e file. h4, h5 is another idea that can show up at some point. So white has good play. All right, instead of rook to c8, another idea is queen to d6. One possibility is not just to now play rook f to d8 for black, but maybe in some cases play knight f4. So knight e5 takes care of that. g6, bishop h6, rook f to c8, and h4. So I mentioned this before. This is a standard motif in many isolated d-pawn variations. So white will use this h-pawn as a ram. Play h5 if possible, take on g6, and then knight takes g6. Okay, bishop to f8. This is also very typical for black. Not fearing the exchange of the dark squared bishops. This isn't a Yugoslav attack in the dragon. There's no h-file mate coming. And the black king is actually pretty decently placed much of the time on g7. And so in fact, white will very often reject this exchange of bishops. Okay, again, if knight to d7, white plays rook e1. And on bishop to g7, then h5, rook c7. So very consistent play by both sides. Rook e1, rook a to c8, h6. And here's an interesting little tactical puzzle for you. Should black retreat the bishop to h8 or to f8? One move is perfectly fine. The other move, I think, just loses. Okay, you might have been inclined to play bishop to f8, which makes sense because there's at least some possibility that the bishop might get shut out of play on h8. However, on f8, there's a big tactical problem. White plays queen f3, and there's no good way to defend the knight. If you play bishop to e7, white plays knight e4, and if the knight takes, then queen takes f7 check. All right, let me put some arrows here. This, okay, you could maybe play queen at d8, but then you're extremely tied down. And if you instead play knight takes e4, then there's queen f7 check followed by queen g7 mate. All right, well, what about just moving the knight instead? Well, the problem with this is knight to e4 and the queen is trapped. Black's queen has no safe squares at all. So white is winning after queen f3. So you've got to go back to h8. And now bishop a2, as mentioned. And again, white has very good play, but black is solid. I mean, everything is kind of, just holding together, but it's enough. So this would be a very interesting position. I'd probably rather have white myself, but some people really like having or facing the isolated pawn, and they're confident that they can neutralize the opponent's initiative, and then 30 moves later win the ending. And there are people that succeed in doing this. So it's I don't say that as a parody. I mean, there really are people who are great defenders in these formations. Max Delugi in the United States was such a player. He basically plays blitz now, but I remember watching him as an up-and-comer. I mean, he would very often, whenever possible, he would go for an isolated, or would take a position where he's facing the isolated pawn, and would just defend very accurately, very stubbornly for a long time, and then win the endgame. All right, but as I said, I'd rather have white here, even against Delugi. Okay. So bishop to e3, as I said, is maybe Yevseyev's main line. But Plasky played knight to c3, which is also an important move. And this is like what we saw before, but this is a tempo down relative to the other variations that we were looking at, which is why I think he kind of prefers bishop to e3 a little bit. So white still has good play here, but I think in the other line, white has very, very good chances for an edge. Here, it's still balanced. All right, in this position, black can play knight to b4 or b6, and I suspect b6 is the more accurate move, but they're both playable. Knight to b4, bishop to b1, b6. And now, I think white's most accurate move here is probably a3. Now, if the knight goes to d5, we play knight e5, bishop b7, rook e1, rook c8, queen d3, and bishop to g5 is coming next, probably. So black may want to just trade and go for some play here. So the c3 pawn needs to be defended. White could consider c4 here, but bishop to d2 is okay. g6, queen h3. Another very typical idea here. So you always have to be aware of knight f7 ideas, or bishop to h6. And when the rook moves away, then knight takes f7 with the idea of queen e6, mate, after king takes. So black will be, I think, reasonably well advised to play a move like bishop to d5 to shore up the e6 point. And now queen h6 is possible, already at least hinting at captures on g6, also with the idea of playing rook e3, rook h3, or rook to g3. Both of these could prove quite dangerous for black as well. So rook f to d8 prepares bishop f8, bishop to d3 is also a sensible move. In some cases, preparing bishop a6, sometimes c4, and of course, just connecting the rooks. So that's always, almost always very useful for white in these positions too. So I think white maybe has a little edge here, or at least is close to having an edge. All right, well, Plaskett played rook to e1, also a very typical, entirely decent move. Short played bishop to b7, knight e5. And here maybe Short can improve on what he did. In the game, he played knight b to d5, which is not a bad move, but it might be more accurate to play rook to c8. And, okay, white has a variety of options here. You could play a3. This would be a normal move. Maybe black plays knight to c6, then trying to pressure the d4 pawn. Another idea for white is bishop to e3, and then black could play knight to c6 here too, or put one knight or the other on d5. And then finally, a third idea, although it doesn't seem to be as effective here, is rook to e3. This can be extremely dangerous. There's a game you might want to check out between Ray Keane and Tony Miles. And Keane uses this rook lift and destroys Miles in a very similar position, but I think a little bit different if I remember right. Here, black can play knight to c6, and the pressure against the d4 pawn is kind of annoying. White doesn't want to take on c6 with his knight. His knight's great on the square it's on, but if there's no other choice, then you just do what you have to. Alright, so that's a possible rejoinder. Another idea for black is the immediate knight to c6. So this is worth considering too. But short played knight b to d5. I mean, he didn't play knight to b4, so he could just bring the knight straight back again. Alright, Plaskett played queen to d3. Again, with ideas like bishop to g5 kind of lurking around. If you could give white two free moves, he plays bishop to g5, then he takes on d5. The knight can't recapture because queen h7 is mate, so he recaptures some other way. Well, actually, he can take with the queen because then he threatens queen g2. So he still has some time to defend, but again, these knight d5, bishop f6, queen h7 ideas are at least in the air. Alright, there's another point to queen to d3, however, and it's not just to put the most direct sort of pressure against h7 possible, but there's another idea, which is after rook to c8, that white can play queen h3, which is in fact what Plaskett did. So this maintains the pressure on h7, but it also introduces, again, this knight f7 idea, especially if g6 at some point, bishop h6, and then knight f7, and on king f7, queen takes e6 will be checkmate with the black rook on e8. So this is a good idea, but it might have been more accurate for Plaskett to play queen g3. So knight h5, and now queen h3. Probably the best is just going back, and white got a free move. Alright, of course knight h5 wasn't forced, but bishop to h6 is an annoying possibility. So queen g3 is a nice little move to kind of poke around and see what concessions white can extract from black. In the game, it was queen h3, as I mentioned, and short swapped and then played queen to d5. Maybe the more restrained queen to c7 would have been a little bit of a slightly better choice. But queen d5 is not awful. Okay, white played bishop to d2, defending the c3 pawn and preparing to connect the rooks sooner rather than later. Black played g6. Maybe it wasn't necessary here, but it's what I like to kind of refer to sometimes as good hygiene. So we just avoid all of the tricks involved with the h7 point, and the bishop's going to retreat to f8 and go to g7 in many cases too. All right, bishop c2. So now bishop to b3 is certainly on the previews of coming attractions. Black could play queen d6 here, but he played queen to a5, and this is a little bit of a provocative move. It leaves e6 undefended. It takes the queen away from the king side, and of course, it's trying to induce c4 in some cases. But there's also another idea that short had, which is very interesting. I don't know if it's fully sound or not, but it is quite an interesting idea. Now, here Plaskett played queen to h4, but maybe bishop to b3 would be more accurate. Immediately kind of eyeing knight takes f7 ideas. Maybe in some cases also there's an idea like knight takes g6, hg6, rook e6, fe6, bishop e6, and if king to g7, queen h6 is mate. Of course, that was all very cooperative, but it shows that there are possibilities for white involved with these sacrifices. So I'll go ahead and enter that. So let's say white gets a second move in a row. We'll take here, hg, rook e6. All right, maybe black doesn't need to take here, although I suspect if he doesn't, then white should probably be in decent shape. So takes, and now, okay, the original idea was bishop e6 check, king g7, queen h6, and that's mate. All right, rook f7 would be forced, but okay, maybe bishop c8, and this gives white 3 pawns for the piece and some attacking prospects. Again, this is kind of speculative. It's just showing what kinds of ideas are around. Queen takes e6 check may be another very decent idea. So if rook f7, we can just take it. If king g7, we take here with check, and you can't block again because the bishop's also there. So maybe king h8 is best. If queen h3, he can just block with his queen. So probably queen takes e7 is more or less forced. And all right, I don't know if white has enough here, but it's not clear that he doesn't. I mean, it's useful that he's threatening the bishop here, so that gives him a little bit of time. And bishop h6 might be coming, or another idea might be bishop f4, bishop e5. Another idea still might be rook e1, and then the rook goes to e5, or even just to e3 with the idea of coming over. So black's up a rook for 3 pawns, but white has really beautifully placed pieces, so he maybe has some chances here. All right, just showing ideas. In the game, though, Plaskett played queen to h4, and this is an interesting move. I mean, he's looking to step up the pressure on this knight with bishop to g5, and he's also clearing room for rook e3, rook h3. So it's, as I said, a very sensible move. Is it better than bishop to b3? I suspect probably not, but it's also decent. Anyway, here black, I think, had a better move than what he chose. And let me invite you guys to try to figure out what black's move should do here, because the threats are not very far away for white. So it's a position where, you know, it looks like black has a lot of freedom to choose, but it's maybe not as much. White is coming quickly, so what would you do with black here? Well, I think the best move here is probably knight to d5. Again, this looks a little bit funny because the knight's going away from the king side, but after queen h6, knight takes c3. I mean, this is really, really provocative, but I don't see a win for white. Okay, knight takes g6. Now, which way should black recapture? It actually makes a difference, I think. Not a huge difference, but some difference. Well, if h takes g6, bishop takes g6, we're going to see this. We'll come back to this variation shortly. So takes, queen takes, and so on. We'll come back to this. But instead of bishop takes g6, white has a much better move. Rook takes e6. And I think black has to play extremely accurately here to not just get killed in a hurry here. So first of all, of course, he cannot take the rook. I mean, this is a blunder because white plays queen g6 check, and then queen to h7 mate. So that's right out. The best move is knight to e2 check. All right, what's the big idea of this? Well, rook takes c2. This is the big idea. We want to get rid of this extremely dangerous bishop, so then we can take the rook. There's no queen g6, queen h7 mate. So rook e2, throw in queen to d5. Yeah, actually, let me see. If rook takes c2 here, then of course you take the queen. So there's nothing really to think about. I mean, the only question is if rook takes e2 is really serious or not. But the body count is definitely in white's favor. So probably it's winning, at least clearly better for white. So queen d5 is necessary. Of course, now there's bishop to e4, but then queen takes d4. So we've got all these little tricks and counter tricks. The material is even. White saves everything with rook a to e1, bishop a6, for instance, and now bishop to d3. And white is a little bit better here. And the reason why is that black's king's position is a bit weaker. So if the white bishop can find its way somehow to the a1 h8 diagonal, black is in big trouble. While it's harder to see how black will whip up an attack with his light squared bishop against white's king. So white doesn't have any real weaknesses on his king side, so white's a bit better here. But black is still kicking. All right, going back here. So that was hg6, rook e6. Oddly, black can play f takes g6, and this is the better move. So now if rook takes e6, so here's the difference. Rook f7 takes rook g7. So black has to find a whole series of only moves. But ultimately, white is nothing better than perpetual check here. Okay, well, what about, going back here to this point, what about bishop takes g6? Well, let's take a look at that line now. So king h8, rook e5. White has, of course, a couple of big threats here, but he's also down 2 pieces for just a pair of pawns. So black can afford to be generous here. Knight e2 check, king f1, and now queen takes e5. After de5, bishop a6, black has a rook and 2 minor pieces for a queen and 2 pawns. Black's pieces are all very active, and it looks like this is just equal. So with knight to d5 here, black still would have been very much alive and kicking. But short played rook takes c3, and of course this was his idea with queen to a5. White could obviously take the rook on c3, but if you look, I mean, you can see that white's position is under serious pressure then. So the bishop is under attack, okay, both rooks are under attack, the d4 pawn's attacked, and black's bishop on b7 is pretty glorious, frankly, and it's hard to see how white's going to attack. I mean, black will follow probably with knight to d5 or rook to d8, pressuring the d4 pawn. And this looks entirely playable for black. So Plaskett found a much better move, bishop to b3. This is quite nice. The black rook is not really running away, and again, the knight takes f7 trick, or maybe knight takes g6 trick, is lurking around. So black played knight to d5. This makes sense. So it chases the queen from its square, and it closes the bishop on b3's diagonal to e6 and f7. All right, Plaskett played queen to h6, and now what should black to move do here? Well, here the natural move is best, or at least what I would consider the natural move, and that's bishop to f6. So preparing to cover everything up over on the king side. After something like rook a to c1, bishop g7, queen g5, maybe black should repeat, and now take on e5. Rook takes e5 would be a blunder because of rook c1 check, so de, queen c5, and so this is how black will break the pin without losing a rook. White finally needs to cash in the exchange, but there's no way for him to make further progress because rook e3 is a blunder due to knight to e2 check followed by queen takes c1. So white's slightly better here, but it's really nothing serious. Black will survive this pin, the discomfort that it entails, and with a piece and a pawn and active pieces and a safe king now as well for the rook, black is only very slightly worse. In the game, though, short played continued in this very aggressive vein with bishop to b4, and no doubt this was part of what he had calculated earlier. So if bishop takes c3, then he plays bishop takes c3 right back, and he's hitting both rooks. However, this is what Plaskett should have played. Knight to d7, threatening queen takes f8, mate, rook to d8, and now bishop takes d5. So a very important point. If black were to recapture here, let's say queen takes d5, whoops, let's say queen takes d5, well, actually that's just bad for 2 reasons. So we'll make the more natural move, bishop d5, knight f6 check, and then queen takes h7 as mate. So black has to play bishop takes d4, or should play bishop takes d4. So this covers the f6 square. Now bishop b7, now we can take on a1, take on d7, and here white has an extra bishop for 2 pawns. And winning this is going to be a lot of work, but still white has very good winning chances here. So that's what white should have played. Instead of knight to d7 after bishop to b4, he should have taken. Okay, and now black's last chance. So knight to d7, he could have taken advantage of to nearly equalize. Not quite, but nearly do so. All right, the move that he should have played was queen to b5. And now, after bishop takes, well, okay, if knight takes f8, bishop f8, black is fine. He has a pawn for the exchange, his rook then retreats, and he's really in great shape. So bishop d5 is best, now queen d7, takes, and here, if you take on c3, bishop c3 back, and the rooks are forked. And this might have been what both Plaskett and Short had seen, and maybe Plaskett had seen this and avoided it. But he has the little swish and zug, rook a to b1, and only after bishop a5 now to take. But this position is only still slightly better for white. So black has pretty fair chances to hold here. In the game, though, short played rook to d8, and this looks entirely reasonable, but there's a tactical problem with this, and it takes some calculating to work it out really to the end. So give it your best try. You know, I would spend at least 5-10 minutes really analyzing this position carefully. If you want to go longer, by all means do so. But to really work everything out, I think would take some time and effort. After all, a player as great as short, and he's a great tactician as well, he failed to find it, so he didn't see this coming. So here's how it goes. So the first move is pretty obvious. Bishop takes d5. If black recaptures, then once again we have knight f6 check, followed by queen takes h7 mate. So he's got to take the knight instead. And now what? So if the bishop retreats, well, black is not in really that bad a shape. He can just retreat his own rook, and then he's still up a pawn. All right, if bishop takes c3, then black plays queen takes d5, threatening mate on g2, and then takes the bishop. So let me just show you this. All right, so this would be a blunder. Queen takes d5, threatening mate. So let's say f3, bishop c3, and black is up material and he's winning more. I mean, this is absolutely hopeless. I mean, white can basically resign here. So that's no good. And yeah, as I said, if bishop takes b7, okay, actually, yeah, I didn't mention this move, but let's see. So bishop b7, well, rook b7, bishop c3, bishop c3, and here I suppose white has rook a to c1. So this may be a resource to keep some advantage for white. So let's see if we can do any better than this. All right, from here, is there anything better? Doesn't seem to be. So rook b7, bishop c3. Okay, you got to take. All right, so this is perhaps about the best that white has. Maybe black plays something like rook to b8 at this point. And now, all right, if rook to e3, okay, not bishop to, oh, you could play bishop to d2. Sorry, I was thinking rook h3, but the queen drops. So probably rook e to d1 would be the right way to go. And now maybe black plays something like rook to d8. Anyway, white is certainly better here, but black is in there swinging. So bishop takes b7 is not an awful move, but white has much better. It's rook takes e6. So this is a crusher. The threat, or one of the threats, is rook to e8 with mate next move. Now let's say black plays rook c8. So this seems to cover everything. I mean, white has regained his one pawn, but black has a bunch of threats. Kind of threatens to take the rook. He definitely threatens queen takes d5, which would hit g2 and hit e6. And black also threatens bishop takes d2. So at first sight, this seems to be big trouble for white. But he's got a tactic. Rook takes g6 check. Okay, hg6, queen g6, king h8. Yeah, if you go to f8, then bishop h6 check is bound to lead to a quick mate. So king h8, and now little backward stepping here. Queen h5 check, queen g4 check, and then you take the rook, or sorry, the bishop, and now white has a bishop and 2 pawns for the rook, so material is even, but black's king is very weak, and his pieces are all hanging. Bishop to e4 check is another threat here as well. So white wins. Alright, so in the game, after rook takes e6, short instead tried f takes e6, but now bishop e6 check, king h8, bishop takes c3, and a tactical problem, if bishop takes c3, then queen f8 is mate. So black tried rook to d8, so he saved his rook, he covers the back rank, but white finished the game immediately. So one more move, and black resigned. Alright, the winning move is queen to f4. Threatening queen to f6 mate, threatening bishop takes b4 followed by queen to e5 mate. And hey, white's even up a pawn here, as if all the mating problems that black has aren't enough. He's got that to worry about as well. So short resigned here, and it's a nice game by Plaskett. Not perfectly played, certainly. There were some inaccuracies, but nice combination at the end. And very consistent prosecution of the attack by Plaskett. And of course, the great thing about this game is that we can use these ideas too. So those of you who don't like the French, to kind of go back full circle to where we started from, this might be a very nice weapon for you. So you get some sharp attacking play, you get a very easy development, and if you're familiar with playing with the isolated queen pawn in general, this will be right up your alley, whereas it'll come as a big shock to many French players. I suppose maybe some of them play d4 openings where they might have some sense for this. But unless they play, let's say, the Karpov variation of the Nimzo-Indian or the Semitarash, they're very unlikely to find themselves with black in such variations. So this, I think, is an interesting surprise weapon that I would recommend giving a try, especially if you don't like facing the French in the normal variations. All right, so that'll do it. I wish you the best of luck with this, and if you have some successes with this, or if you have some experiences you want to relate, by all means, share them in the comments section. And also, let me remind people to check out my blog. It's at thechessmind.net, so you got to have the in there. So thechessmind.net. And if you're interested in lessons, contact me there or on the Chess Video server to do that. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.